I thought I had everything figured out. I was happily married to Mason, part of a wealthy family, and living a life I considered calm and stable. But that night in the hotel lobby, Mason's sharp voice shattered my peace. With a mocking grin, he boasted about his new wife, none other than the daughter of the president of Goldsmith Enterprises. As he laughed proudly, the mention of Goldsmith Enterprises piqued my interest. I knew that name, but it took a moment to place it. When it hit me, the realization stunned me, though Mason continued gloating, oblivious to the irony in his words. I'm Patricia, 37 years old, content with my husband, Mason. I work in my family's real estate business, handling administration while my father manages the strategy. As an only child, I'll eventually take the reins. Balancing my career and personal life has always been crucial, especially with Mason. He works for a moving company, and while it's a demanding job, I respect his commitment. I avoid discussing my degree or the fact that I'm on track to become president of the company. I don't want him to feel inadequate. We met during college through a mutual friend. Initially, Mason had his eyes on her, but after she turned him down, we began to connect. Our personalities clicked. His easygoing nature complemented my meticulousness. We married in our late 20s, and life was good. Mason's parents accepted me with warmth, unlike the struggles many of my friends faced with in-laws. Despite Mason's long hours and physical exhaustion, he always made time for our relationship, even thanking me for staying up to share dinner after his late nights. But after a year of marriage, things started to change. One night, as we prepared for bed, Mason brought up children, his tone harsh and frustrated. It's been a year, no rush, I reassured him, but he snapped back, citing statistics. You know, there's a 90% chance of conceiving in a year for couples not using contraception. I suggested we both get tested, but he exploded, accusing me of blaming him. It's always the woman's fault. He spat. His words stung more than I expected. I wanted to argue, but instead, I quietly agreed, telling him to get tested alone. You're just coasting along in your dad's company, he added bitterly. The comment hurt, as I worked hard and was actively learning from my father to eventually lead the company. That night, the tension was palpable. We fell asleep without a word, our backs turned. From then on, Mason's attitude soured. One evening, after discussing future plans with my father, I returned home to find Mason furious that dinner wasn't ready. I've only just walked in. I tried to explain, but he dismissed me with, typical of a small company's boss's daughter. His assumptions about my father's business stung, and the bitterness between us deepened. Though I suggested he have a drink to calm down, I began to feel like our relationship revolved around avoiding conflict with alcohol. It was painful, but it seemed necessary. The following day, Mason's icy behavior continued. He coldly demanded dinner be ready when he got home. I'd scheduled a day off to see a gynecologist for fertility testing, something Mason had pushed for. Though he refused to get tested himself, it was frustrating to handle it alone, but I had no choice. I wanted to know the results quickly if there was an issue. After the tests, the doctor told me the results would take time. Mason's reaction when I told him that night was as cold as ever. If it's your fault, at least you're getting tested. Let me know what they say. His assumption that I was the problem cut deeper than I let on. 6 years later, at 37, I was still struggling to conceive, and Mason seemed to have given up on the idea of fatherhood. His late nights turned into complete absences, and his excuses became more absurd. I was frustrated by his behavior and the growing divide between us. My work was more demanding, and the dream of having children was being pushed aside, but Mason's recent actions were intolerable. One day, I found Mason's phone left behind. When I answered it to tell him, a woman's flirtatious voice greeted me. We've been waiting for 50 minutes. Hurry up, or we'll miss the park opening. I hung up in shock. The woman, Diana, was no colleague, she was his mistress. Clutching his phone, I felt a surge of rage and betrayal. Mason had been having an affair while I struggled with the possibility of infertility. His behavior made sense now, but the pain was unbearable. I began gathering evidence of his infidelity, unlocking his phone and documenting the intimate messages he shared with Diana. I carefully returned it, pretending nothing had changed. A month passed in this tense silence, and then my father called me into his office. His serious tone prepared me for difficult news. Perhaps sensing what was coming, Mason suggested we separate. It was a relief to hear him say it first. I had already been contemplating divorce. Yes, let's divorce, I replied. I agreed quickly, perhaps too quickly. Mason seemed taken aback by my readiness, his face betraying a hint of hope for his future with Diana. Despite the sting of seeing him relieved, I signed the divorce papers without hesitation. "I'll file these tomorrow. I'll be out of here," he said, his voice cool and detached. "Are you sure about the mortgage?" I asked casually, suspecting he hadn't fully grasped the financial implications of living without me. His job, though demanding, hardly paid enough for him to manage the mortgage on his own. But Mason, ever confident or perhaps naive, didn't show any sign of concern. Given his betrayal, I felt no need to help him transition. A few days later, I moved back in with my parents. Initially, they were concerned for me, but their worry quickly turned to anger when I told them about Mason's infidelity. They rallied behind me, reassuring me that leaving him was the best decision. I threw myself into work, trying to keep the pain of my failed marriage at bay. The days blurred into one another as I tackled project after project, but after a year of relentless work, my father noticed the toll it was taking on me. "Why don't you take a break? Things will get busier next month," he suggested one evening, his tone gentle but firm. Grateful for the suggestion, I agreed. I needed a change of scenery and some time to clear my mind. I planned a solo trip to the Northeast, craving a refreshing escape. The crisp, fresh air of the Northeast felt like a balm for my soul. The kindness of the locals slowly healed my emotional wounds. After a few days, I booked a stay at a luxury hotel in Los Angeles, eager to indulge in the best experience I could afford. When I arrived, the peace of the hotel lobby embraced me. I sank into a chair, sipping a welcome drink, letting the fatigue of my journey melt away. As I relaxed, I half-joked about the idea of moving to Los Angeles. But then, a voice cut through the calm. Hey, what are you doing here?" I turned, startled, to see Mason entering the lobby with 2 large suitcases. The last person I expected to see on this peaceful retreat was my ex-husband. As he walked in, I saw him with a young woman, early 20s, flawless skin, bold makeup, and striking red nails that seemed out of place for the chilly northeastern weather. She wore a short skirt, oblivious to the cold. I stood frozen for a moment before the words slipped out. "Why are you here, and who is she?" Mason looked almost pleased as he introduced her. "Oh, let me introduce you. This is Diana, my new wife. We're on our honeymoon. Guess what? She's the daughter of a wealthy businessman." My heart sank as the name, Diana, hit me like a wave. This was the same Diana from the phone call months ago. Mason was visibly proud of his younger, wealthier new wife. "You're here alone? That's sad," Mason sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. Diana looked me over, then smirked. "Hey, Mason, is this your ex-wife? She looks old. Hurry up and check in," she said, her tone sharp and dismissive. I managed to keep my composure as Mason casually draped an arm around her, boasting, "Yeah, I'm set for life now, married into money. You keep struggling in your modest life." His laugh was high-pitched, cutting through the serene atmosphere of the lobby. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but I remained calm. "Oh, Diana's from Goldsmith Enterprises. You've heard of them, right?" he asked, his pride almost childish. The mention of Goldsmith Enterprises clicked in my mind. I recalled the name, and Mason's glee only grew as he saw my recognition. "Impressive, huh? Her family's loaded. They even paid off our house mortgage. Thanks for making the divorce easy, Patricia," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I barely flinched. "Yeah, I know them. They're in that big building downtown, right?" "I've been there," I replied coolly, my calm demeanor masking the tension building inside me. Mason's surprise was evident. "You've been there? Well, her family owns a huge company. Breaking up with you was the right choice," he smirked. I nodded, still unfazed. "That building? It's part of our real estate holdings," I said, my tone casual, as though I were discussing any ordinary detail. Mason and Diana exchanged confused glances. "What do you mean, our real estate?" they both asked in unison. "The building is leased by my father for his most prestigious office," I explained, my voice steady. "I'm not sure if your company is involved in real estate, but it's certainly not a shabby building." Their confusion deepened. "Yes, I know how grand it is. I was there when my father bought that building for $500 million. Recently, he mentioned that a tenant hadn't paid their rent. Turns out it was Goldsmith Enterprises. In fact, My father owns a real estate empire worth $5 billion, and your company has been the tenant for the past few months. You haven't paid the rent, I revealed, watching their reactions closely. Diana laughed incredulously. That can't be true. Our company's doing great, she said, still laughing, but the shock in her eyes betrayed her disbelief. Rather than continuing to engage in their theatrics, I pulled out my smartphone. I'm here with the daughter of Goldsmith Enterprises, I said into the phone. Can you send me the rent reminder notice? Within moments, my father sent me a clear image of the notice addressed to Goldsmith Enterprises, showing 4 months of unpaid rent. I showed it to Mason and Diana, their denial fading as the proof sank in. If you don't pay soon, we'll need to pursue legal action, I said calmly. What are you going to do? Diana's confidence faltered. Come to think of it, Dad's been stressed about slow sales and firing employees, she mumbled, her previous bravado slipping away. Mason, on the other hand, continued to deny reality. You're just trying to break us up, aren't you? You're still bitter about everything, he yelled, his voice filled with anger. You're dirty for doing this. His words stung, bringing back the painful memories of our marriage, but I no longer cared. I was no longer the person who took his accusations silently. What are you saying, Mason? Do you really think I still have feelings for you? You're foolish, I said, my voice steady. I've been over you for a long time. I feel sorry for Diana, though, being stuck with someone like you. I looked him in the eye. Did you marry her for her money? You had shallow reasons for marrying me too. You wanted kids, but when we couldn't have them, you called me useless. You're to blame for everything, and now you think I still care about you? You've lost your mind. Mason's face turned red with rage. You're an old hag now. You can't even get married or have kids anymore. Diana and I are planning on having a baby soon, he retorted, his voice thick with desperation. That was when I finally dropped the truth. Oh, I didn't mention it, but I'm 5 months pregnant, I said calmly. Mason's face froze, and his jaw dropped. That's right, after our divorce, I found someone who truly supports me, my boss at work. He's been amazing, both professionally and personally. I found out I was pregnant 5 months ago. It was a quick marriage, but my father and the company celebrated it. Mason's demeanor crumbled, his earlier bravado disappeared. You're pregnant, he whispered, his mind clearly struggling to comprehend the shift in my life. Were you using birth control? He asked, his voice thick with disbelief. I felt a mix of pity and relief as I looked at him. My life had moved on from the chaos he brought. Remember, I had infertility tests at the clinic, and there were no issues. The problem wasn't just with me, I said bluntly, watching his face contort as the realization hit. He mumbled, does that mean Diana and I can't have kids? I didn't engage with his self-centered musings anymore. Please keep your affairs separate from mine from now on, I said firmly. As for the rent for Goldsmith Enterprises, I expect full payment. If you don't pay, we'll have no choice but to take legal action. I have nothing more to say to you. Goodbye. With that, I left Mason and Diana mid-argument and walked away with my head held high. Back at the hotel, my new husband greeted me with a warm smile. Welcome back. Sorry I couldn't help around the house. Was everything okay? I smiled, feeling the weight of everything lift off my shoulders. Of course it was fine. I'm just glad to have you, and I appreciate everything, I replied, my heart full of peace. Since marrying him, I had found a new sense of stability and happiness. The thought of Mason no longer lingered in my mind. I never saw him again, but through my father's connections, I learned that Mason and Diana's situation had only worsened. Life had turned in my favor, and I was finally free.